folks. Colonel, thank you again for hosting us. Good afternoon, everyone. It has been a long 36 hours for a lot of people around me and their teams, but the good news is the storm is behind us and we are well into cleanup mode, but the last thing we're going to do is spike the football in the end zone. We have a lot of work still to do. First, I want to give a huge shout out to everybody who worked through this storm. Thank you to all the snow plow drivers and equipment operators who worked throughout Tuesday night to prepare for this storm and then put it in overdrive yesterday to keep our roads and highways clear. And we're back at it this morning doing further cleanup. And you'll recall that we put in place a state of emergency effective Tuesday night, and that allowed us the runway that we needed to tackle this. There were some points yesterday when the snow was coming down at a rate of several inches an hour, but they kept on through it. So our hats are off to each and every one of them. I want to thank the great men and women of our state police, Colonel, the Office of Homeland Security, Jared, all the local and county police officers, and our firefighters and EMS who responded to incidents throughout the state, whether it be to help a stranded motorist, and we had more than a few of those, protect others at the site of a traffic incident, or to help block off an area to protect people from downed wires. I particularly want to thank all the members of the various New Jersey State Police teams, Colonel, that worked with NJDOT late last night to assist in rescuing motorists stranded on routes 78 and 280 and getting those filming shelters. They also assisted on Route 287 and in keeping Route 10 open through Morris Plains. I myself came down on 287 right in the teeth of the storm from Randolph and Morris County through Somerset, Middlesex into Monmouth County yesterday, and it was tough sledding, so hats off to everybody. I also want to thank you and me to the conference call yesterday afternoon with the 21 county OEM liaisons. That was extremely instructive for me. It was good to see this operating live and in color. I also want to thank the crews working to restore power. I'll get more into the power piece in a second, but the linesmen and women out there deserve our thanks. It is hard and exhausting work. As I mentioned, I was at a staging area at Morris County College yesterday. I was in Sussex County this morning and paid a visit and got a tour of the staging area at their fairgrounds. That's a staging area in each case for crews working to restore power in the county, and I want to thank them personally. And by the way, the folks I were thanking, a lot of New Jersey men and women, but a lot of folks from out of state. And I said both in Morris County and in Sussex County, we're good for our word in New Jersey. So we have long memories. We appreciate the gestures of the folks who came in from places like Georgia and Florida and Kentucky and Pennsylvania and Alabama. And if need be, when the time presents itself, we'll return the favor. You have my word. Now, throughout the state, there are still numerous roads closed due to continued poor conditions. And they tend to be, fair to say, Diane, local roads in this case. They've got downed trees or power lines, abandoned vehicles, or malfunctioning traffic management equipment. State, county, and local crews are clearing the mess from this storm and will continue to do so. They are getting a helping hand from Mother Nature today. I'll talk a little bit more about this, two sides to that, by the way, in a second. But we ask that everyone still please exercise good judgment and caution out there to follow the directions of first responders who may need to temporarily detour traffic to expedite the clearing of a situation. NJ Transit buses, and Diane will speak to all of this more in a moment. NJ Transit buses are back and running statewide. The buses, at least last I checked, were at about 80% of their full strength, and hopefully that continues to go up. On the rails, most lines have been restored to service. What was the case even a couple or 3 hours ago may no longer be the case. So I would ask that everybody check in particular with www.njtransit.com, njtransit.com, to get a particular specific sense of the line that you're looking for. I know there were issues earlier on Bergen County, Port Jervis, Morris, and Essex had at least had some trees over the tracks. Gladstone and Montclair Boonton lines each had challenges earlier. Please check that website to get an updated sense of that. System-wide cross-honoring is in effect on rail, bus, and private carriers and light rail systems, as well as the PATH and New York Waterway. Again, njtransit.com for more there. As I mentioned, we have the benefit of, this is the other side of the coin on better weather. We have the benefit of some warmer weather and sunshine today, and this is expected to remain through the weekend. Obviously, on the one hand, this is going to help clear away some of the snow and ice, but temperatures are expected to dip below freezing during the overnight hours. A lot of standing meltwater is going to turn to ice, including some black ice, especially on untreated side roads and sidewalks. So if you're going out after dark, please, please, please be careful. It isn't the only reason, but it is a principal reason why, and again, we make decisions based on fact and science, but that OEM, under the Colonel's leadership, has recommended that the state of emergency stay in effect until at least we get through this evening. Now, the big issue is power. At the height of the storm, more than 350,000 New Jersey customers were without power. That number is currently down and coming down to sort of the low 200s. I'm guessing it's around 205,000 today. As of 2 hours ago, and Joe will come up next, 17,000 of that number were folks who lost their power last Friday in the first storm. And that is completely and wholly unacceptable. You can imagine how they're feeling. We know that Morris County, in particular, was hit hard by this storm. I think outages over 50,000 in Morris County alone at the height of the storm. These outages compounded those outages added to the tens of thousands we saw also in Hunterdon, Sussex, and Warren counties, as I mentioned, in some cases who were still without power from the last storm. In Morris County alone, before coming down here, I spoke to the mayors to give you two specific cases in East Hanover and in Parsippany. Our team has been intensively working with local officials, county officials. You got in East Hanover, you got a school they can't get power to yet. You got in Parsippany, I think over half the homes in Parsippany are without power, at least as of an hour or so ago. So these are real and they continue. Joe and I were on a conference call earlier today with the heads of New Jersey's 4 electric power utilities, and we made it very clear to them, number one, we did an assessment in each of their cases what the current status was. We made it very clear to them that job number one is to restore power, but also our frustration, our deep frustration, frankly, it turned from frustration to anger on my part, at the uneven preparedness and in the uneven response, not just from the last storm last Friday, but even leading up to that. And in particular, I have to say JCP&L's apparent lack of readiness remains a major issue that must be and will be looked into further. JCP&L operate in some of the most wooded and rural parts of the state. And we learned from Sandy that a lot of trees won't survive hurricane force gusts. And at some level, you can understand some of this, and at another level, you can't. So on the understanding part, in the immediate aftermath of the weekend storm, we had gusts over 40 miles an hour. You can't put men and women up in buckets in that kind of wind. You're putting them at danger and at risk. You then had a bunch of roads that were blocked with fallen trees. Understandably, you got to clear the roads, otherwise the trucks can't get there. But that's 5-6 days ago. And again, this is distinct from the admiration we have for the men and women who are out there trying to get this fixed, from the corporate preparedness, which leaves a lot to be, in my humble opinion, to be asked for. I was in Sussex County, as I mentioned this morning. I went to Andover, a community where there was a fatality last weekend, tragically, of a man who apparently touched a live power line, and I heard frustration there. I've heard it all over the state with what the current situation is. You know, the Sussex County lake communities, which I didn't actually visit, you know them, Crandon, Owassa, and others, quintessentially working class communities, the best we have in this state. They've been out of power since Friday. So we're working with Joe, or more formally, President Fiordaliso and the BPU team to conduct a full investigation into the responses to the storm. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, the President and I already had discussed public hearings in JCP&L's area, but we're going to take a broader approach. We're going to examine what went wrong and whether the improvements to protect and strengthen our grid devised post-Sandy have been implemented. We will look to see if all preparedness measures taken before last Friday, knowing a major event was coming. My gut tells me they weren't. And if they've not been, this is entirely inexcusable. And we'll also look to the next storm and make sure that we're even better prepared. You know, we're not doing our jobs unless we're learning as we go and making it better and better, and also recognizing you got to fight the next war, not the last war. So each storm, each weather event has a lot in common and some uniqueness at the same time. I also reinforced to all utilities BPU President Fiordaliso's directive that New Jersey-based crews are to stay in-state to complete the work of restoring customers. You know, there was some good news of sharing manpower. PSE&G, I said this publicly a few days ago, ultimately had several hundred of linemen and women who went in to help and augment the JCP&L team once their weekend challenges were taken care of. Atlantic City Electric, at a smaller scale, but still appreciated, did something similar. We have an interesting reality of the 4 big electric distribution companies in the state. Only one of them at the corporate level is domiciled in New Jersey. That's PSE&G. So we made the point that we hoped the multi-state operators look foremost to the New Jersey needs. This is their local operating entity's home, and we expect them to put their needs at the head of the list. Let me end again by thanking all of our first responders for their work, both before, during, and now, even after this storm. And again, I want to make the distinction again and thank the crews in particular trying to restore power. The problems they are fixing are not on them. They deserve our gratitude for putting in the grueling hours under very difficult circumstances. And most importantly, I want to thank the residents of New Jersey for pulling together, for helping their friends and neighbors to dig out of this storm, as only our folks in our great state can do. I want to ask if we could get brief remarks from a few of my colleagues up here. Well, maybe let's start with BPU President Joe Fiordaliso. Joe, come on up.
Thank you, Governor. And I think you hit on the salient points. And under your leadership, we are going to initiate an investigation, if you will, a review of the steps that were instituted after Sandy, after Irma, after that horrific series of weather patterns that we occurred 5 years ago. I think this is the first time since then we've incurred weather patterns back-to-back like this that have been so devastating. And we're going to examine to see whether or not the utility companies have followed those procedures that we had laid out right after Sandy. And if they have not, they're going to be held accountable for it. And another thing I would just like to very briefly mention, and you mentioned it, Governor, is the mutual aid assistance has to be something that we have to review and review carefully. I have very little patience, as the governor does, for crews being sent out of this state when in-state utilities need help. It's our in-state utilities that should get that help first. And once they are stabilized, and then those utilities can send them out to help other jurisdictions. But New Jersey has to be number one. And that's where it has to occur, and we're going to ensure the fact, or I'm going to ensure the fact, and sometimes you don't win all the battles, but I'm going to fight it hard, and I know under the governor's leadership, we're going to go a long way in ensuring the fact that New Jersey utilities are taken care of first. So I want to thank you.
Thank you. I want to call up, if I may, Colonel Callahan, and reiterate that last point. We want to have a Jersey first mentality here that is unmistakable and unambiguous. Colonel, thank you again for everything and as well as for hosting us today.
Thank you, Governor. And I'll just take a minute to thank the partners that have staffed the Emergency Operations Center over the past few days. They've been here around the clock, and that's members of our own OEM, DEP, certainly DOT, Board of Public Utilities, obviously Human Services, and even an urban search and rescue component that came in last night. It was a phenomenal storm. When you have troopers on snowmobiles on interstate highways, that's a phenomenal storm. I stressed to everybody I had the opportunity to today, over 715 motor vehicle accidents, over 1,500 motorist aids within that less than a 24-hour period. And I know the frustration level may have been high for those motorists stranded out there, and the inconvenience was certainly something that the frustration from that is understood. But from a public safety objective and goal standpoint, we did not have one fatality in the state of New Jersey yesterday, and that's from a statewide, and I will knock on wood along with the governor, on a statewide, state police patrolled roads, as well as local and county law enforcement. That's a pretty phenomenal feat. As the governor said, we're not up here spiking the football, but again, to not have one fatality or really any critical injury. Our biggest incident up last night on those northern roads that were shut down for a little bit was a trucker who had a slight injury to his hip. So we do look at that as a success from a public safety standpoint. Again, we'll take a look at this incident, what we could have done better with regard to maybe staging heavy-duty tows or tow trucks up in that area to get those roads clear. But if you have those roads come to a stop from a few tractor trailers, it's difficult to get the DOT's plowing operations in there. So we had a combination of what we called a strike team of 50 troopers across various disciplines in the state police up there, including aviation. The storm cleared up enough to allow us to put helicopters up there last night and today so the pilots could radio back to this room and say, we need exit 43 plowed. We need right lane plowed in this location. And that was a phenomenal asset that demonstrates the magnitude of the storm. It was an asset that we had not employed before. So I'm certainly proud of everybody that contributed to that effort. For those motorists that were stranded out there, I'm glad you got to your destination safely, as again, that was our priority last night. And I thank the governor certainly for his support of this effort and for him jumping on that phone call yesterday with all 21 county emergency management coordinators, showed his level of dedication in making sure that this partnership in emergency management is one that the entire nation can look to. So thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate that. Before I ask Diane to come up, I have to note, as you all likely know, that Diane oversaw and ran the New Jersey Turnpike, then she ran the Florida Turnpike, and she made a point in passing to remind me that she had not dealt with any snowstorms in the past 7+ years in Florida, but was welcome home. Just an extraordinary job done by the Department of Transportation, led by the Commissioner and her team, several members of which are here with us today. You know, an incredibly complex back-to-back storms. I had three, not one, not two, but three visits to the Traffic Management Center in Woodbridge over the past number of days, and the level of professionalism was exceptional, and that begins with leadership. So I want to ask Diane Gutierrez-Scacchetti to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Governor. So yesterday was a phenomenal storm. You'll hear that word more than once, maybe more than a dozen times. And the common theme here is safety. It's our primary responsibility is to keep motorists as safe as possible. DOT had over 800 employees deployed, over 228 contractors, and over 2,700 pieces of equipment in action at the height of the storm yesterday. A couple important points. That storm started a lot later than expected. And I'm sure a lot of you were out tapping your foot at about 11 o'clock wondering where the snow was, as were we. But when it decided to come around 1 p.m., it came more intensely than we could have imagined. It fell at a rate that exceeded 3 inches per hour, and it accumulated at rates higher than expected. So what we did at the DOT is every time we were able to clear a region, some of you saw that we got snow in South Jersey that we didn't anticipate. When those crews were freed up, they were moved north, and we continued to move crews north to hit the hardest hit areas in North Jersey. It was an extraordinarily cooperative relationship, and the Colonel mentioned that. We can't do this job without New Jersey State Police, without the New Jersey Turnpike Authority, without South Jersey. DOT requires their assistance all the time to maintain their assets, and then to the extent they can, to support our operations. And all of that occurred last night. As of this morning, all of our major roadways are cleared. There are some areas of our highways that you'll see what we call padding, which is where snow, this was a very heavy, wet snow. It compresses, and so that doesn't remove as easily as one of those nice, kind of light, fluffy storms that people like when they go skiing. We're working to clear the rest of that today, salting it, melting it, and pushing it off the road. The sun is obviously giving us a hand with that. We are pushing back shoulders, so if you're out there today, this morning, you'll see the shoulders aren't cleared, but hopefully by this evening, most all shoulders will be pushed back on the major interstates and the ramps will be cleaned. One of the things the governor mentioned that's important, the state of emergency is still in effect. Mother Nature is kind in melting this snow, but it will refreeze. We will be out tonight with salting operations. One thing I have to say I observed yesterday, people need to be out on the roads. They have to go to work. They could be working in safety-sensitive jobs where they're needed. Please obey the speeds that are posted. Most of what we saw yesterday on the road in spin-outs and accidents were people who were going at a rate of speed that I would say was probably somewhat unsafe. And sadly, we probably found them down the road in the shoulder. So if we can just abide by speed limits, really focus on safety, because safety is first. And to be honest with you, the way that storm came in and the fact that we did not have any road fatalities is quite remarkable, to be honest with you. I think people were lulled into a little bit of security in the morning and went out and then maybe went to the mall, and by the time they got out of the mall, there was quite a bit of snow on the ground, and getting home wasn't easy as they thought. So tonight, I would suggest that if you don't have to go out as it gets colder and that some of that freezes up, think about staying home. We will be salting. We will continue to support the motorists that may get stranded for whatever reason. We responded to over 600 yesterday. And if you think about it, we're just 24 hours out of the actual storm starting time. So the roads are in good shape for what was a short duration, heavy magnitude storm. So thank you, Governor.
Thanks, Diane. Great job. Diane mentioned this. You can plan as much as you like. Sometimes you get a curveball. One of them for me yesterday was the snow in South Jersey, which the models didn't predict. But that storm, if you looked at it, sort of had that looping around, and it came in basically out of Philadelphia across the Delaware, and there was some substantial snow down there, frankly, before there was substantial snow up north. Thank you again for that. One of the things you always have to worry about when all your attention is focused over here, you want to make sure nothing happens over there. And I want to commend our Director of Homeland Security, Jared Maples, for making sure that didn't happen. We're not spiking the football. We wake up every day vigilant to make sure that continues to be the case. But I wonder if Jared could say a few words before we take a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. From a strategic perspective, the security posture of the state remains vigilant in good weather, bad weather, or even a nor'easter. So over the past 24 hours, our security tempo has remained steady. During storms like this, we remain attentive to the security of the critical assets we have here in New Jersey, and we don't lose sight of the persistent threats to our state. We regularly communicate to our private and public sector partners, and that continued throughout the storm. Lines of communication are also always open to address any critical security issues, and we thank our partners, the state police, in teaming up on these efforts. Our security activities continue as normal, both before, during, and after the storm, including our intake and analysis of suspicious activity reporting. It's also worth noting, again, the stellar job of the state police, the Office of Emergency Management, DOT, BPU, and all of our state partners, but then too also our county and local partners, as well as the private sector. From a security perspective, it has to be a coordinated effort, and as the governor mentioned, I thank you for your leadership on that. We have to make sure that we're paying attention across all areas of threats and risk. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Time for a few questions. Does that work? Please.
You mentioned that obviously the investigation has to be conducted, but you would hold the utility companies accountable. What does the state have at its disposal to do that?
First of all, I think it's too early to tell exactly, regardless of what we have at our disposal, to speculate on that. I'd rather get through the next few days to get everybody back up on their feet. But Joe, you may want to come up and comment additionally on that. We're not happy and we're frustrated, and there are many folks out there who are frustrated, and they have a right to be.
Thank you, Governor. Basically, through the regulatory authority that we have at the Board of Public Utilities, we can order certain things through board orders that the EDCs must follow, and then track it and ensure the fact that they are following it. And so that's the reason why we have a regulatory body like the Board of Public Utilities to oversee that. Sure.
Does it appear that tree trimming was a significant factor?
Vegetation management is always a problem. And as you get into the more rural areas, of course, it becomes an increasingly greater problem. And we did initiate a vegetation management program, and we're going to revisit that to see if that program is being followed through by the EDCs. And you know, it's like everything else. You give an edict, and you have to monitor it to make sure it's being followed to the letter of the law. So that's the oversight we have.
I'll give you two other quick comments. One is on the first question. Joe handed me a document that the BPU had done post-Irene and post-Sandy, I think, in terms of what the expectations were for the public utility providers. And we're going to look very carefully to see whether or not those promises were kept. Secondly, on the wooded piece, it's a good question. So I mentioned I was in Morris County yesterday and Sussex this morning. This morning I was with three legislators, Senator Oraho, Assemblyman Space, and Assemblyman Wirths. And Assemblyman Wirths in particular made a pretty strong plea that some of the out-of-state power linesmen and women who were coming in said that we had an unusual amount of proximity between branches and power lines. I'm not an expert, but that was a robust discussion we had today, and it sounded like a reasonable discussion that we need to have. Please.
Governor, what went wrong? In Morris County alone, 150 motorists had to be rescued. Don and I experienced it ourselves, stuck on a ramp on Route 20, trying to get on to Route 24 East. You know, should those ramps have been closed, and should plow trucks have been staged to plow those roads quicker than?
I'll ask the commissioner come up, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you live and you learn. We want to be self-critical and look in the mirror and say, what could we have done better? One of the things we talked about, while we had a lot of heavy equipment staged, it now is quite clear that there are a couple of strategic spots in the state, particularly interstates in the hilly parts, where maybe going forward you'd have more strategic assets. On the what's going right side, I'm very happy we declared a state of emergency early that gave us a long runway and we had no fatalities. As frustrated as people are rightfully by the situations they had to live through. But Diane, can you give any more specific thoughts?
Absolutely. So as far as staging equipment, all the DOT equipment is staged. Plows are put out, contractors are outfitted well before the storm begins, and they're deployed. They're not sitting in the yards waiting. I think what happened with these ramps in particular is traffic, again, was probably a little bit up from the fact that the morning was relatively calm in terms of weather. People came out, then they get stuck behind a downed tree, a downed wire, an overturned tractor trailer. It's a very methodical process for us to try to back those vehicles out, clear that ramp, so that, and we use it with Colonel Callahan's team. We're working side by side to get everybody backed out so we can get the plows in there to clear the snow, to get the tow truck in, to either upright the tractor trailer, push it off the road, get the power company in there. It is unfortunately, in the midst of a storm, a longer process. And so Colonel said it earlier, none of us like the fact that anybody sat in their car and waited for help. We're just happy they all got to their destinations safely. So again, uncomfortable, yes. But certainly I think the best you can do in that situation is team up and get people moved out of the way. There's no way for us to be staged everywhere. In terms of the lessons learned, what we would probably stage more are heavy equipment towers. So you have standard tow trucks, you have tow trucks that are specifically meant to deal with large commercial equipment. And those, while they were out on the road patrolling, we'd probably stationarily stage them in places where we knew we have higher risk.
Well said. Three other quick points. Colonel Callahan reminds me, we had a lot of trees down. I don't know, how many?
149 on state and interstate.
Yeah, so 149 trees down on state and interstate roads, which is probably, I don't know this for sure, my guess is that's at the extreme end of recent history. Secondly, you know, we had pleaded with people to stay home. And Diane mentioned this, the fact that it rained longer in a lot of the state probably lulled some people into thinking that this wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And if you were out between 1 or 2 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock, maybe a little bit later yesterday in the central and northern part of the state, you got whipsawed, you got clobbered, and it came on very quickly. And thirdly, one of the incidents, by the way, I believe I'm right about this on 287, is there was a phalanx, the usual formation of the plows, and somebody tried to get around the front of the phalanx. And a tractor trailer, no less. So you go into this with trying to control as much of that which you can control. And again, for the most part, folks did exactly what they should have done. It was incredibly impressive to be on the roads early to midday yesterday and see them wide open. They obviously got clogged up again because I think some people maybe got lulled, but also because you had narrower passages, single lanes as opposed to 3, and it felt like there's more traffic. Please.
Can you just clear up the fatalities? So there were none on the highways, but there was the guy in Andover who touched the wire?
So the guy, this is to the best of my knowledge, and if anyone disagrees with this, please tell me. None on the highways. There were 2 high voltage fatalities that I'm aware of. One in Andover Township, which was on Saturday from the last storm. Tragically, a 41-year-old guy who's, I think as of yesterday or last night, was identified a dad of 2. And then in Franklin Township, Franklin Lakes, pardon me, there was a man, single operator of a motor vehicle who was, I think, literally incinerated. There's a photograph taken from a press helicopter. Those are the 2 that we know about. Have I missed any that you all know about?
That's what we know.
So that's what we know. Please, let me go here and then back, because I know I owe you for earlier.
I'm just curious, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I thought the colonel said that there were no fatalities.
On the roads, on the state. First of all, again, the first one happened in the last storm.
The other incident the governor's referring to is a gentleman, if I'm not mistaken, tried to go around a road that was blocked and detoured, and rather than take heed to those signs, if I'm not mistaken, went around, came across a high-tension wire, and in fact came in contact with that wire. And a motor vehicle
Also
accident.
accidents.
Right, that would not be considered a motor vehicle accident, more so of a industrial accident, quite frankly, due to his contact with a high-tension line.
Ma'am, sorry about that. I owe you one from Sussex County, I know.
Can you talk about the priorities in terms of who gets their power restored first, given the fact that there's still 17,000 people?
Yep.
Who've been out without power since Friday. But also secondly, do you have any indication that JCP&L did not have all of its equipment in Jersey or had its equipment out of place?
I'll let Joe answer the latter. I don't want to make accusations that are not well-founded. So I can tell you what we were told earlier, Joe. I'll just repeat this, right? So PSE&G, this is a couple hours ago, so forgive me, it's probably dipped given the good weather. A plus or minus 80,000 customers without service, and they have a global ETR, which is getting folks back and getting it to 0 as of midnight on Saturday. ACE, Atlantic City Electric, has just over, probably around 8,000 customers without service. They've got a global objective to get to 0 on midnight on Friday. Rockland, Orange and Rockland has low 20,000s without service, and they are to release their ETR later today. I don't believe it's been released since you and I spoke to them, right? And JCP&L, that leaves JCP&L. Their current outages look to be around 120 to 125,000, of which, and you rightfully pointed out, of which that includes 17,000 from the so-called Riley storm. And they have said they will be releasing their schedule, their global ETR, as it's known in the industry, later today. And I don't believe they have as of yet. So as you can see, their numbers are the dramatic outliers. You had a second, or not?
Are they going to?
Are you seating the senator from, Senator Johnson beside you, his question?
Are they going to be prioritizing the people who've been without power since last?
Yes, they claim that other than schools, police stations, hospitals, they are prioritizing the folks who have been out without power the longest. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Brett?
There was a truck ban in Pennsylvania, and it wasn't one here. Was there a reason for that, or did you think of one, or?
Yeah, we thought of it, and I'll let maybe Diane and Pat can answer this. First of all, they're very rare here, and they cut both ways. So I think Pennsylvania actually banned tandem trucks
Correct, and empty trailers.
and empty trailers. So to be specific, New York did something but didn't enforce it. And by the way, none of the accidents in New Jersey were tandem related. They were single trailer related. These things cut both ways. When they've been tried in the past, I think Diane said she was last associated with one in New Jersey in 1996. There was one in 2015 that was taken off almost as fast as it was put on. And in some of these cases, they're bringing food in the commerce that we need to keep the state going. But I'll let Diane or Pat add to anything to that.
No, come on. So we'll do it together because it affects both of us. So Pennsylvania was a limited ban. It was tandems, it was empty trailers, it was recreational vehicles, car-towed boats, and motorcycles. And so for that purpose, we understood that. But again, it wasn't what we were seeing, which was our tractor trailers, which are carrying, needed supplies, not just to New Jersey, but, throughout the Northeast or perhaps south of us. As far as New York, they had what was defined as a broader ban, but it was soft enforcement. So the colonel can talk to that. But as again, the governor said, the 6 or so tractor trailers that caused us the biggest headaches were not tandems. They were standard tractor trailers, and I can't tell you what the contents of them were, but they took a while for us to try to either upright or push off the road.
And to the commissioner's point, of those, what we would deem major traffic incidents, it was 6 tractor trailers. There were thousands of tractor trailers that traversed the highways yesterday. Those that did not pull off into truck stops and continued on. So 6, given the high volume of traffic that came through, again, not claiming victory over that, had they heeded the governor's warning and pulled off into a truck stop, obviously they can't pull over on the shoulder because that impacts the snow operation. But again, the last time both the commissioner and I was a young trooper on the road in 1996 in a similar event. We hadn't seen it since, to my knowledge, and that interstate commerce piece, it has a ripple effect beyond just keeping tractor trailers off the road. And to the commissioner's point, there's some important supplies that need to get through. And in this instance, although inconvenient and frustrating, the lack of fatalities, I think we would make that decision again with regard to tractor trailers and a travel ban on them if we had to make it again.
Yeah, and certainly in similar circumstances. And I think the other thing that's important is that you have, the last time they even closed the New Jersey Turnpike was 1996, and it was very, very difficult and caused a lot of consternation in the trucking industry because they are also trying to, as we've said, trying to move important product. So it's not for us to determine what should go where and when. People have expectations. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it's certainly not an easy thing to enforce.
I would just say, by the way, not that all options are on the table every time out. I want to clarify, Joe and I were just talking, to the best of our knowledge, JCP&L did not have any assets. I apologize. They did not have assets out of state. To the contrary, and Joe personally got a lot of this done, their service area has been augmented at the peak by, I think, 30 other operating utility manpower from 30 other operating utilities. I mentioned in Morris County today as well. I mean, a lot of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky. But I want to give a particular shout out, as I did the other day, and again, Joe deserves the credit here. PSE&G came up big on the first storm over the weekend. They had, at the peak, 280 line men and women in the JCP&L operating area. And ACE, again, thanks to Joe, they got their folks pulled back from out of state and ultimately contributed about 3 dozen. But to the best of our knowledge, their assets were in the state. Maybe one more, please.
Off topic, if you don't mind.
Off-topic question in New Jersey?
Yeah, right. President Trump is reportedly threatening to veto any spending bill that would include funding for the Gateway project. Just wanted to get your response to that.
I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to, yeah, I just heard that earlier. It's hard to put that one into proper context. Yeah, I'd start, I guess the frame I would start with, it's the most important infrastructure project in the United States of America. So this is the same president who believes we need an infrastructure renaissance, and he has a plan that notionally, and I say notionally, commits $1.5 trillion to infrastructure. Not the way I would do it, for sure. $200 billion of federal money, which I'm told just replaces another 200 that he cut, and $1.3 trillion, pardon me, what's a trillion among friends, of state, local, and private sector money. That may be how you build some infrastructure. It's not how you build a tunnel under the Hudson River. Arguably the most important commercial corridor in the United States. New York is the largest market in the world. We sit alongside of it. It's a huge game changer for New Jersey and New York, but not just New Jersey and New York. Northeast Corridor, it's a national economic imperative. It's a national security imperative. And by the way, the thing that's shocking to me is it has, when I say broad, I think in the Northeast Corridor, I don't think there's an exception to this. It has complete bipartisan support. And again, I want to give another shout out to Rodney Frelinghuysen. The congressman has been a particular champion of this project. So I have to believe I'm still an optimist. I still believe when something is so compelling, with such broad-based support, it gets done. I assume there must be some other drama behind the curtain. That's the only thing I can assume. I quote, the chairman of Amtrak has said recently, this tunnel's going to get built. That's the good news. The only question is, does it get built in a well-planned, well-thought-out manner, or does it get built because of a national disaster? God knows, please God, it's door A and not door B. Thank you all very much.